Hi, hello everyone. Hello, welcome to San Francisco Ballet's Points of View lecture series. I'm Jasmine Yepwin, and I'm the Associate Director of Education at San Francisco Ballet. On behalf of everyone at San Francisco Ballet, thank you for joining us for the second Points of View lecture of the 2022 season. We are thrilled to have performances in front of live audiences in the Opera House again. So thank you to all of our audiences, both in person and online, for supporting SF Ballet throughout the pandemic. This season, we are pleased to provide this free Points of View lecture series on Facebook Live and YouTube. Before the pandemic, Points of View lectures were held in the War Memorial Opera House before Wednesday evening performances. This year, we are continuing that tradition, and we are offering a new Points of View lecture online at 6 p.m. Pacific time before each Wednesday evening performance. The recording of today's Points of View lecture will continue to be available to view online on SF Ballet's YouTube channel through the end of the season in May 2022. For a full list of the schedule of this year's Points of View lectures, as well as our other education and audience engagement offerings, please visit us at sfballet.org/events. Before I introduce our host and dancer, there's a bit of housekeeping. This event is streaming on Facebook Live and YouTube, so we might have time for questions or comments from our online audience at the end of the discussion. As our panelists cannot see the questions or comments as they are posted on those platforms, we will have a staff member reviewing those comments and passing along the questions that are relevant to the discussion. Additionally, when commenting in the live chat, we respectfully request everyone to abide by our community guidelines, which can be found in the link in the chat. Today's Points of View celebrates Jerome Robbins' ballet, In the Night. Some might say that In the Night is Robbins' elegant tribute to love. In the Night is the second ballet you'll see in Program 2, which runs through Sunday, February 13th. And the program includes Helgi Thomassen's Caprice, Jerome Robbins' In the Night, and the West Coast premiere of William Forsythe's Blake Works 1. Today, we will begin with an engaging lecture about In the Night with Jennie Scholick, followed by a conversation about performing in the night with SF Ballet principal dancer Mathilde Froustey. Jennie Scholick, PhD, is the Director of Education and Training at San Francisco Ballet. Jennie joined the ballet in 2017 as Associate Director of Audience Engagement and was named the Director of Education and Training in 2021. As a dance scholar, Jennie's research and writing have appeared in Dance Chronicle, as well as the recently published Oxford Handbook of Contemporary Ballet, among others. I'm really looking forward to this lecture and the interview with Mathilde, and I hope all of our viewers are too. Over to you, Jennie.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Looking forward to it. So let me see if I can get my screen sharing. All right. Does that look right, Jasmine?
It looks great.
Perfect. All right. So thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk about In the Night, which is one of my favorite ballets, choreographed by one of my favorite choreographers, Jerome Robbins, and also to get the chance to talk to Mathilde about what it's like to perform in this work. Before I do that, I am, as Jasmine said, going to give a very brief little lecture, little overview of Jerome Robbins's life and some of a little bit of background, let's say, of this work. So what we have up here is a quotation from a review that came out when In the Night premiered on January 29th, 1970, so just about 52 years ago. From the outset, it did certainly stand in the shadow of its older sister, choreographer Jerome Robbins' magnum opus, Dances at a Gathering, which had been created the year before. And yet, at the same time, from the get-go, In the Night also stood on its own. Here is a quote from critic Walter Terry, published upon its premiere, saying, "Have you ever seen a nocturne? I have, courtesy of the choreographic magic of Jerome Robbins." And I think that this is probably, I don't know if Robbins read his reviews. Many don't. But if he did, I think he would have liked this one. Here Terry is suggesting that the piece is a nocturne made incarnate, right? A physical manifestation of the piano pieces of Frédéric Chopin to which it's set. And this, I think, is something that Robbins would have liked because of his previous work to Chopin, Dances at a Gathering. He said the following, and this was in a letter to Ballet Review, so the capitalization is indeed original. He said, "There are no stories to any of the dances in Dances at a Gathering. There are no plots and no roles. The dancers are themselves dancing with each other to that music in that space. Thank you very much." So he's protesting, right, that there's not a story here. It's just a dance. It's just about the music and the dancing. And yet, this comment seems really reminiscent to me of one that his colleague at New York City Ballet, George Balanchine, used to make about his plotless ballet Serenade, which is another ballet that, it doesn't have a plot or a story per se, and yet it really seems like it does. And what Balanchine said about Serenade was many people think there is a concealed story in the ballet. There is not. There are simply dancers in motion to a beautiful piece of music. The only story is the music story, a serenade, a dance, if you like, in the light of the moon. But as I said, in each of these works, Serenade, Dances at a Gathering, perhaps In the Night more than any of the others, there do seem to be stories, if not a plot. There are certainly characters, even if there aren't roles. And the dancers, sure, they are themselves, but they also seem to be something more. So what more is going on, perhaps, in the night? To take it all the way back to the very beginning, Jerome Robbins was born in 1918. He was the son of two Jewish immigrants from Poland, Harry Rabinowitz and Lena Rips, and he grew up in New Jersey. The plan was not for Jerome Robbins to become a dancer and a choreographer. In fact, he actually enrolled at New York University, where he was planning to study chemistry or journalism, but he dropped out pretty quickly and ended up following his sister, Sonia, into show business. Sonia was a dancer with a couple different modern dance organizations in New York. And Robbins was quite talented, so he made quick progress. He ended up on Broadway first, where he actually intersected for the first time with George Balanchine in a production of Keep Off the Grass in 1940. And then he made his way to Ballet Theater, the company we now know of as American Ballet Theater, which in the early 1940s was just getting off the ground. At Ballet Theater, Robbins has his first both success as a dancer and as a choreographer. As a dancer, it was in the title role of Petrushka. As a choreographer, it was in Fancy Free, pictured here from the last time the company did it here in San Francisco, which he choreographed Fancy Free in 1944. It was a huge hit right away. And it was such a big hit that it actually gets made into a Broadway show on the town, which is also a huge hit. So by the time he's 26 years old, he is like the most in-demand choreographer really on Broadway and in ballet in the United States. And yet, although he's having all this success, he is a little bit unsatisfied still. And so he ends up reaching out to George Balanchine and his co-founder of New York City Ballet, Lincoln Kirstein, to see if there might be room for him at that organization, which was also kind of just getting off the ground. It's 1948, and New York City Ballet is just moving into the City Center Theater and taking on its new name of New York City Ballet. They said yes, he joined the team, and the next several years see Robbins creating quite a few important works, both on Broadway and at New York City Ballet. On Broadway, shows like Miss Liberty, Call Me Madam, The King and I, and Pajama Game happen. Also Peter Pan. And at New York City Ballet, he makes a whole flurry of works, pretty much one a year from 1949 until 1956. Ballets that included The Guests, pictured here, The Age of Anxiety, The Cage, Afternoon of a Faun, Fanfare, and finally in 1956, The Concert, which was his first ballet to Chopin music. And after that, 1956, there is nothing for New York City Ballet until 1969, until Dances at a Gathering in 1969. This break with New York City Ballet is often tied to the great tragedy in the company that happened that same year. Taniqua Leclerc, pictured here, contracts polio on a tour of Europe and is paralyzed from the waist down, ending her ballet career. And this is often talked about in relation to George Balanchine's work because Leclerc was his wife and one of his great muses. But she was also Jerome Robbins's great muse at New York City Ballet. In fact, in the concert, which he'd just finished creating, he made a couple of, but in particular one solo for her that after her paralysis, he actually removes from the ballet. It never gets done again. And so he has a really hard time coming back to New York City Ballet with her not dancing there and after this great tragedy. So instead, he does work on Broadway. He makes West Side Story, both the theatrical production and the film. He works in experimental theater for a while, and he creates his own small ballet company called Ballets USA, which he tours with. They go to the Spoleto Festival, they tour Europe, they actually go to the Soviet Union at one point in time. And quite fatefully, they make a stop in Iceland where he meets a young Helgi Thomasson and helps broker his scholarship to the School of American Ballet. But that said, he never fully loses touch with New York City Ballet. He stays in pretty close contact. He continues to rehearse his works. And so in 1969, he's at a bit of an inflection point creatively and professionally. And New York City Ballet needed a few new ballets to go on a gala program. And so he's been thinking about some Chopin ballets, thinking about some music, and he decides to start something, to make something on the company for the first time in 15 years. Started with a pas de deux, and that pas de deux grew and grew and grew and grew until it was 10 dancers arranged in twos and threes to some of his favorite Chopin piano music, and of course that ballet is Dances at a Gathering. It was an immediate success. There was no question from the first night that it premiered on that gala that Dances at a Gathering was a major masterpiece, and that it was inaugurating kind of a new creative moment for Robbins at New York City Ballet. So he comes back the next year in 1970, planning to sort of follow on that, right? But although In the Night seems like a natural follow-along to Dances at a Gathering, that's not actually what he started with. He was planning to make Goldberg variations, which he actually ends up making a few years later. But he was in a really bad state right at this moment in 1970. He had had a couple of bad breakups in the year before, romantic breakups. He'd also had a very bad LSD trip that caused a nervous breakdown that he was still just sort of clawing himself out of. And he ends up tearing his Achilles tendon on the second day of rehearsal. So In the Night actually happens because he decided he needed to do something a little easier than Goldberg variations, something that he could work on while on crutches. And so he picks these piano nocturnes, these Chopin nocturnes that he'd been thinking about all the way back to the year before, but that were going to have a very different tone than Dances at a Gathering, where Dances maybe is like a sunlit field, a gathering of youth. In the Night is like a moonlit garden, and it's a more mature work with a little bit more darkness in it than we see in Dances at a Gathering. Ballet is set to 4 Chopin nocturnes written between 1830 and 1843, and it looks at these 3 couples, these 3 pas de deux that then come together at the end. And each has its own tone and voice. So I'm going to really quickly take us through each of these, and then we'll talk to Mathilde about them in more depth. The first was made for Tony Blum and Kay Mazo, and is perhaps the most uncomplicated relationship that we see. The curtain rises on a starry night, this couple enters, and we see that kind of sequencing of movement that Robbins started working with in Dances at a Gathering. Deborah Jowett says of it, "We do not notice choreography, but we see dancing. Even ballet steps that we know melt into the long phrases before our eyes can freeze them." These 2 dancers move towards and away from each other as if like they're just constantly trying to reunite. The second pas de deux was made on Violette Verdi and Peter Martins, and is more formal. There's a chandelier projection. It helps create this sense that maybe this ballet is taking place at a party, that there's a certain amount of like formality, like a British estate or a manor house. And here the couple seem more mature, more settled into their relationship. there's this effect that they're remembering things as well as living in the present. And there's some really beautiful moments where it feels like you see, again, there's a little, you'll see it when you watch the ballet. There are these moments where it feels like you see the passion, right, that has been kind of pushed down underneath stability and commitment and trust and comfort, but that is still there somehow underneath all of it. And Robbins makes that quite clear choreographically. And finally, the third pas de deux, which was made on Francisco Mancion and Patricia McBride, is all passion. It's temper, it's extreme emotion. These two were known to be dance actors, dance actresses in their own way, and Robbins makes great use of that here. It is Mancion later said that Robbins told him it's one of those on again, off again affairs. They might get together, they come, they go. Balanchine apparently hated this pas de deux. It did not reflect the kind of relationship between men and women that he thought ballet should represent. And he's reported to have said, "Can you imagine? Old man stand and beautiful woman in beautiful dress goes down on the floor. Can you imagine?" And that is referencing a particular moment towards the end of this pas de deux. And then finally, all of the couples come together and they sort of greet one another and then retreat back into their own world. So one of the things that's so interesting about this ballet, I think, is that there is this real sense that there is a whole world that exists in the wings, that there's a party happening that everyone has sort of wandered out from, that we're seeing these couples in these little snippets of their day or of their lives, right? That there's so much more happening off stage that we don't get to see. Robbins denied this totally. And yet, like with the comment about Serenade having no plot, it is that effect, that sense that there is more, that we're only seeing excerpts, that I think make this ballet really what it is. There's this sense that these people have lives and dramas that extend beyond the stage space, and that there's almost a feeling that if we sat longer in the audience, maybe more couples would appear, right? More people would wander out from this party, or one of these couples might come back and we would learn more about who they are and what they do. So for the rest of our time together, we are going to talk with one of the dancers who interprets one of these couples, Mathilde Froustey, who is a principal dancer with the company. I have her bio here, so I am going to share a few little details about her before we jump in. Principal dancer Mathilde Frusta was born in Bordeaux, France, and received her training at the Marseille National School of Ballet and the Paris Opera Ballet School. She joined the Paris Opera Ballet in 2002 and was promoted to soloist in 2005 after winning the gold medal at the Varna International Ballet Competition in 2004. In 2013, she left the Paris Opera Ballet to join us here at San Francisco Ballet as a principal dancer. She's danced the leading ballerina roles in many of the big classical ballets, including Giselle, where she won a 2016 Isadora Duncan Dance Award for Outstanding Achievement with Teet Helemitz, as well as Sleeping Beauty, Swan Lake, Nutcracker, and others. She also dances much of the neoclassical and contemporary ballet in our rep, with roles by choreographers including Helgi Thomasson, George Balanchine, Val Canaparoli, John Cranko, Alexei Ratmansky, and Christopher Wheeldon. Tonight, of course, we'll be focusing on Jerome Robbins, and she has danced quite a bit of Robbins, including Dances at a Gathering and Opus 19, The Dreamer, in addition to In the Night. So welcome, Mathilde.
Hi, thank you so much for having me tonight.
It is great to see you. It is really lovely to have you here. So I want to start by just kind of jumping in on this question about Jerome Robbins sort of more broadly. My understanding is that Robbins's work is quite well known in France and in Paris, but I'm curious if that was true and what your first exposure to the work of Robbins was.
Of course, Jerome Robbins is really famous in France, but for us in France, it's really American style. It's really, it's a bit intimidating because we know New York City Ballet dance it, we know San Francisco Ballet dance it. And so I remember being in Paris Opera Ballet and I was lucky enough to dance the concerts. And I was really nervous because I was like, oh my God, I'm not American. Can I actually dance that? Do I have the moves in me? Because for us, Robbins is really American, you know. So French people get really intimidated by Jerome Robbins, for sure.
But do you remember feeling like it's like more American than like a George Balanchine ballet?
Somehow, yes. Also, you know, George Balanchine was for a minute director of Paris Opera Ballet, and he worked with Paris Opera Ballet a lot. While Jerome Robbins less, he came, he visited, you know, he rehearsed with the dancers, but for some reason we always get really, really intimidated by dancing some Jerome Robbins pieces. And I just kept that in my body a little bit. I remember every time I get casted on Jerome Robbins, I'm like, oh my God, okay, pull the American girl in you, you know.
Well, it's so funny because I feel like you are cast quite frequently now.
Yes, actually,
in Robbins' work, so you must be bringing the right. Do you remember when you first saw In the Night? Was it here in San Francisco? Was it in Paris?
It was in Paris, actually. I was a soloist, and of course it was only for principal dancer, danseur étoile in France, and only the elite of the elite would get to dance it. So as every night I was in the wings watching it, and the pas de deux I'm dancing, the first pas de deux was danced by Claire-Marie Osta. And I remember being, I don't know, I had like, you know, stars in my eyes. For me, I would never get to dance. I didn't think I would get to dance it one day. So when I got casted on it in San Francisco, it was like a dream come true, really, because it's a very, very special, and you know, you've seen it in the audience. It's a really special piece to watch. You get transported somewhere. It's not a piece that you can just watch and be like, yeah, that was nice. It does something to you.
Yeah, it brings you in somehow. Yeah, it really does. It really does. So tell me about learning it. When you learned it here, who did you learn it from? What was that process like for you?
So I learned it quite fast, actually, because we were working on Paris tour, and we had to dance. We went on tour for Les Étés de la Danse, and we brought 16 ballets for 3 weeks. So it was a lot. And I learned it like maybe in 1 hour or 2 hours. Anita Pacciotti taught me, and she's still the ballet master for this ballet. She's amazing. She knows it so well. And I was dancing with Ruben Martin, and it was his last ballet. So it was really moving, because it was the first time I was dancing in, and it was going to be the last time he was going to dance with San Francisco Ballet. So I don't know, it was something really emotional of being my first time and his last time. And also he felt really protective towards me, because I learned it really fast and I was new. And so he was so nice, and he took great care of me in this pas de deux. So I learned it in the best way possible.
So was the first time you performed it actually back in Paris?
Yes.
Was that more pressure than if you had done it here?
A little bit, you know. But anyway, going back on tour with San Francisco Ballet in Paris was anyway a little bit of pressure, you know.
Yes, all of the rest was going to feel stressful.
Yes.
You were saying you danced this first couple. Mm-hmm. Tell us about her. Like, you're a dancer who gets so deep into your characters. I'm sure you have a whole understanding of who she is. Who is she for you?
I don't think about her. I think about them as a couple, because I don't think we work as individual in this ballet. We are a young couple. We just met, and I see this pas de deux as all the insecurity and all the excitement all the fears and all the joy of a couple who just starting dating. They don't have a lot of habits yet, but they don't know each other really well. So sometimes there is some misunderstanding. There was some little irritations, but also there is great love, a lot of passion, but like young, it's not like the big passion of the last pas de deux. It's still polite because we start, it's the beginning of the dating, and by the end of the pas de deux, there is this moment where nothing happens really, but I look at the stars. And she does like a little sous-sous, look at the stars, and then a soutenu, look at the stars. And I see that she has a lot of hopes for this relation. And we'll see what's gonna happen in the future. But it starts pretty well, the pas de deux starts really calmly. They have a little moment in the pas de deux where there was a misunderstanding. They get a little bit tense, but the pas de deux ends pretty well. So she has hope for the future with this guy.
I love it. So that's sort of our who they are, and then curious about, in terms of the choreography itself, the movement, like, are there particular things in this pas de deux that are particularly challenging, or like little moments that really stand out to you as like, oh, this is the moment that makes this kind of what it is, that's sort of really important to this work?
I mean, a few things are challenging. The three couples, we have long dresses and they're kind of heavy, and it's difficult to dance with long dresses like that. So it makes the partnering a little bit tricky, but that's the three of us. Especially for this pas de deux, there is some in between dancer, we call that a little awkward moments in this pas de deux, where steps that you never seen in any other pas de deux, like the way you would flip me, or the way you would partner me with just one hand and I'm in a weird position, or just like going on the floor with a split, and then he like drags me on my butt. There was a few moments like that are really unique, but I think it really fits the pas de deux because it's a young couple, and as I said, they discover each other. So sometimes they're a little bit in French we would say maladroit.
It's like a little bit that makes sense for the character, right?
Yeah,
for the
totally. But I think that's how Jerome Robbins is a genius, because the three pas de deux are so different in steps wise, and that's a genius, You almost don't really need to interpret this pas de deux because the steps are talking by themselves. You don't need any face expression too much. The body will interpret because of the steps. So that's genius to me.
Yeah, it's there in the choreography. You don't have to add.
No.
I have a couple follow-up questions, but because you mentioned it, I'm curious about, you are having to perform in these long dresses, these kind of heavy dresses. How much do you get to practice that? How much rehearsal do you get in that costume?
Not much. We had 2 rehearsals on stage before the opening night. Yeah. I mean, it's enough to be okay for the opening night.
And then the other thing, you were mentioning how different each of these 3 couples are. Have you ever thought about performing one of the other couples? Would you like to? Or
I would love to. I love the drama, so I would love to do the last one. I was watching it yesterday. I was performing it yesterday, and in the wings, and watching Sarah Van Pet, and she's amazing. Literally, I'm tearing in the wings just watching at her. She is the best for drama, for sure. And I was like, I hope one day I'll graduate from the first one and I'll dance the third one.
Well, there is that kind of sense of it, right? And like someone asked the other night, we were doing a class about in the night, and
Mhm.
someone asked, has anyone ever thought about it? Could the three couples be the same couple at different times?
We could. You that's what I think. But I think I never read anything Robin said about it, and I think let it open for a reason. Of course, people would think that, but if he was that, he would have said that's that. So I think it's open for a reason, like that. You can imagine that's what it is, or you cannot, and that's fine.
I think that's right. And yeah, and he certainly never. I mean, if anything, he claimed there were no stories, and he,
Yeah.
it's just the dancing, and stop talking about
Yeah,
something
I know.
else. But
Mhm.
um, so as we've said, you've performed in a variety of Robbins ballets at this point.
Yeah.
And for some choreographers, there's something very, like whenever you ask a dancer about performing balancing, they say it's so musical, right? It's
Mhm.
just so musical. Is there something about Robbins for you that's like, oh, even if I didn't know this ballet was by Jerome Robbins and I started learning a few steps, or I saw it on stage and no one told me it was Robbins, I would know that it was Jerome Robbins?
Mhm. Okay, two things I think just straight up. The modernity of the work. It's modern. It's not classical ballet, and it's not the way. It's different. It's more jazzy than balancing. It's always a little bit. It's on the fine line of Broadway.
It is, yes.
It belongs to a theater for sure, but you see, if you push it a little bit further, it could be on Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that's Robbins. It's always like, okay, it belongs to classical dancer, but it could be something else. That, and also, balancing is all about women. Robbins is more equal.
Mm-hmm.
Men have great solos. In Dancing at the Gathering, the brown guy who was danced by Elgie is one of the most beautiful solo for a man. And Balanchine did a lot of great work for women, more for women than for men. And I think Robbins is, one was almost most. He was attached to create great work for men and women.
Yeah.
So if you see a Robbins ballet and you hesitate if it's a Balanchine or Robbins, if there is a great path for a man, it's usually Robbins.
That is really true, and a really good, yeah, I think that's right. So you spoke a little bit about dancing this role first with Ruben in his last performance, and since then you've danced with a few other gentlemen. How is that different? Does it change? Does it feel different with a different partner, or is it so much in the choreography already that it adapts easily?
I mean, of course, it feels different with different partners, but it's more about the energy. Like Ruben was really protective because he knew it so well. He has done it so well, and I was new. I remember I was shaking a little bit on my first performance, but he was holding me really tight, and I was like, "Don't worry, it's gonna be okay." He was like watching me in the eyes to be like, "It's okay, it's okay," because a little anecdote about In the Night, it's really dark on stage. And before my first show, it was a stage rehearsal in Paris. And I had like what we call a freak out moment when I rehearsed with the lights on stage. I was like, I wasn't expecting to be so dark. And it's really hard to dance in the dark. And I came to Elgie and I was like, Elgie, it's so dark on stage. I couldn't do one step. And he looked at me really calm. And he said, well, it's In the Night. And I froze and I did what you did. I actually laughed and I was like, that's fair. And I left. I was like, he's right, it's so healthy, he didn't say anything. It's just like, well, it's in the night. Okay. so now I know it's really dark on stage because it's in the night. And I remember doing dancing with Ben, and it was the opposite. It was Ben's first show, and I had a little bit more experience in this pas de deux. And I remember telling him, don't worry, it's going to be really dark, but it's in the night. And so I keep this running joke now. Lizzie Powell did a first show a few days ago. And same, after her first rehearsal, she was like, oh my God, it's so dark. And I did Elgie. I was like, well, it's in the night. So I think the pas de deux doesn't change. It's just the energy. When you have more experience than your partner, or your partner has more experience than you, it's a bit different. But at the end, we rehearse, and I don't think you see any difference on stage because the couple kind of melt together. So it's fine.
Mm-hmm. We haven't talked at all about the last section, right, where you come together with somebody else. How do you think about that moment? It's like, all these couples are in their own little world, and then that kind of breaks from.
Yeah. We call that, when we rehearse it, we call that the cocktail party. Mm-hmm. Anita calls it the cocktail party. And that's how I kind of see it. It's and I remember Elgie actually talking to us in Paris because he wanted to adjust it and he wanted us to have the right tone. And he said, imagine you're a cocktail party and you all have different personality. And he reminded me, especially, he's like, don't do like Sarah or like Jen. Keep your first pas de deux mood. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's beautiful, is suddenly those three pas de deux you've seen come together, and it's almost like it wasn't real, and suddenly things gets real because those three characters, they actually meet. And that's where I think the idea of it's the same couple kind of reaches limits, right? Because suddenly those three character or the three faces of this couple meet together. It can be really poetic if you think it's the same couple, mm-hmm. or it can be just a cocktail party if you think it's a different couple. Mm-hmm. But it's a great. I play sometimes. Sometimes I imagine I'm meeting, I'm at the cocktail party and I'm meeting different people, and sometimes I imagine that I'm a version of this woman, and Sarah is another version of me, and Jen is another version of me. So I play with it a little bit. I still haven't decided which one is one, but I'm just playing with it.
Well, reason for people to come see you over and over in it, right?
Exactly.
A little bit different time. So we're coming up on our time, but I want to, if you don't mind, ask you a little bit about coming back from maternity leave. We both had babies this year. Mine is a couple months younger than yours.
Congratulations.
Yeah, she's 4 months, and hopefully you haven't heard her crying in the background. And I think Claude is 6 months?
Yes, almost 6.
Well, congratulations. I'm completely amazed that you are back on stage and doing this. It's incredible. But I'm curious about how do you feel? How is it going? What's it been like for you to adjust to motherhood and performing?
It's not easy, for sure. For so many reasons. The obvious one is the body. My body has changed. And, I thought I would come back way, way easier. I thought it would be easier. As a dancer, as a ballerina, we have this like wonderful body. And I was like, I have a superpower. I'm a ballerina. I'll be back in shape in no time. Well, it turned out I'm actually a woman. Yeah, I'm actually a normal woman, and it turns out it takes a little time. But it has been amazing to it's funny, I was actually talking to Helgi this morning, and I was telling him, I'm sorry, it takes a little time for me to be back, but I'm still performing, so and but Helgi has been so supportive, and he tells me, but don't worry, the important is your baby is doing great, focus on what you have. And I'm like, yes, the other day I wasn't really happy with the show, the rehearsal, and I came back home, and my little boy was here, and he smiled at me, and I'm like, oh, it's fine, it's okay. So there was like this true happiness when you come back home, that really helps think what's really important. You know what, I missed a period today, it's okay.
Yeah, so you feel it's changed your perspective a little bit on...
A little bit, but also it made my time at the ballet, because I'm allowed to spend less time at the ballet, because I have to go back home and feed the little guy, and take care of this little guy. So I used to spend my days at the ballet, even doing nothing, just I was there, stretching out and working slowly. Now the time I'm at the ballet, I'm so much more productive, because I know I have 2 hours and I have to do so much in 2 hours. So I'm working harder in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah.
I guess that's the mama superpower.
I actually, when I was going out to have my baby, Danielle St. Germain Gordon, who's our interim executive director, said to me that if she had her way, everyone on her team would have kids, because people are so efficient and they're so focused, and no choice, right? Like you have to. The time is limited, and so you're going to pour everything into it that you have, and then it has to be over.
And it's true. And also, before opening night of In the Night, I was a bit stressed out. It's been 2 years. I haven't been on stage and things. So it was a lot. And I remember I told to myself, I'm like, listen, I'm not home. I'm away from my baby. That better be a good show. You know? So I think you're right. The time you're at the ballet, the time you're on stage, I want it to be perfect, and I want it to be so good that I don't regret not being at home.
Exactly. It has to be worth it. It better be worth it.
Exactly.
Well, we are pretty much at time, and although we are on Zoom, not on the Opera House stage, and so I'm not going to get the hook pulled off, I am going to turn it back over to Jasmine to wrap it up. But I want to say a huge thank you, Mathilde. This has been a wonderful conversation. It was so great to hear your thoughts on this ballet, and
listening to you, even as a dancer, I learned so much. Thank you so much, because you gave so many details that I didn't know. It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's so sweet.
Well, thank you so much. We are at time. And like Jenny said, we are at the luxury of being on Zoom instead of in the Opera House, using that space on the stage. But thank you so much, Jenny, for the ballet history lecture about Jerome Robbins and his journey to create In the Night. Like Mathilde, I always learn something new, or a lot of new things during your lectures. Mathilde, thank you so much for sharing your stories and experiences and memories from watching In the Night when you were in the wings, a little starstruck, to your first time performing it with Ruben, and the gift of sharing things with dancers who are new to the work. I don't think I'll ever forget the words of wisdom that you said Helgi shared with you, which was, well, it's in the night. What can I say? Thank you so much, Mathilde. I really appreciate your time with us and all of our viewers online. Thank you to everyone watching online now and in the future who's going to watch it through the end of the season. Thank you for being a part of Points of View. I look forward to sharing Helgi's farewell season with all of you. Please visit our website to learn more about SF Ballet's 2022 repertory season and to learn more about our many educational offerings this year. On behalf of everyone at San Francisco Ballet, we wish you and your family good health. Thank you for being with us during this time, and see you at the ballet. Bye.
Bye.